this is too big a moment in the church's life, and it's too big a decision to be done on your own.
Hey everybody, welcome to C3 Church Global Podcast, where we're talking everything church leadership and church growth. And today we've got the distinct pleasure and privilege of having Pastor John Pearce, Gordon Moore, and Steve Burgess, who have all conducted incredible transitions, which is not actually the norm. So it's great to have three very successful people who have transitioned either from a previous leader or given their church over to a new leader and have done it without it even being a speed bump. So welcome, John Pearce. Great to have you with
Pastor
us.
Phil, so good to be
And
here. Love the
Gordon.
Global Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Gordon, great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be here, Phil. Awesome.
Steve, all the way from Aotearoa, the long white cloud, New Zealand.
Hi, Pastor Phil.
Great to have you here.
Great
John,
to be here. Thanks.
Why don't you tell us about your story where you actually assumed the leadership of your current church from a previous leader?
Yeah, well, it's a good story and a happy story, Pastor Phil, which is not always the case in transitions. But yeah, we were 8 years into a church plant. Danielle and I were 29 and 27. Probably on one level, like to say we were accidental leaders. We didn't necessarily see ourselves becoming pastors, but the great thing is the founding pastors who handed over the church did see potential in us. I think what was really great in that setting, and it's probably a good transition principle, is Gordon was actually overseeing our church at that time and overseeing Graham and Pat and the leadership of the church. And I actually remember him one day coming up to them and saying, that couple there, and he pointed us out, they could lead a church one day. And so that sort of external eyes, as well as the leaders giving us opportunity and believing in us, was part of the preparation. And then, our transition wasn't one where they were retiring. They were moving to Canada to plant the first C3 in Canada, in Vancouver. And so it was what made it work really well, I think, as an experience, was they had a vision for their life beyond the church, and they were really moving towards that. And they, a few things they did really well that helped us. They didn't engage with any disgruntled members once they'd handed the church over. They basically said, it's yours and we're out, and we're going to back you publicly and privately. They encouraged us, and they really plugged us into the movement. And so our church was 5 years part of the movement, but they deliberately encouraged us to connect with a variety of different mentors and voices within the movement. They weren't trying to hold themselves and us together. So that there's a few, I guess, key principles there that really helped us work in terms of setting us up. And I like to think we got thrown in the deep end and learnt to swim. And the way we learnt to swim was lots of good people in the movement around us, speaking into our lives, encouraging us. And so they set us up for a win in that way.
Awesome. Now, that was the Fletchers, right?
That's the Fletchers, Graham and Pat Fletcher.
Yeah, and their kids now are actually running the church in Vancouver.
That's right. They've got one set of kids running their church in Vancouver, another lot of back here on the Sunshine Coast on our team here. And so it's, and then Dave's in the States, and a great young guy. So great story.
Amazing. So Gordon, watching you hand over that incredible suite of buildings that you'd sweated blood, sweat, and tears to build, and that awesome church over to Andrew and Wendy McGruther. And it just seemed like a very seamless, beautiful event. And I've looked at that and thought, well, not only are you a great Christian and disciple of Jesus, but a great leader who's able to actually pass on all of that so successfully to the next generation. So tell us the story of how you did that.
Yeah, it's interesting, And I've been involved in nearly 50 years of ministry in New Zealand and here, and I think it'd be true to say that the culture of the original movement that I was in, and also the C3 movement, helped a lot with attitude, so that when it came time to retire, I didn't have the feeling that it was mine, that I'm losing something. And I think we've been surrounded in our movement and outside the movement with really positive input, and who are we serving? And I've just seen so many pastors, because as you know, Pastor Phil, I've actually gotten involved helping other movements with transitions that have gone wrong. And one of the key things is just what you said before, that inability to let it go because it's connected to your self-worth, or as you say, there's been blood, sweat and tears and you fought some big battles for it. And some pastors just can't emotionally let go. Intellectually they can, or practically they say, yep, it's time for me to go. I've got the right leader, let's do it. But then all these emotions start to come. And so that was probably very important in the process toward that. I think the other thing, like John, was we selected a son in the house. Andrew Magruder joined our church at 17, just a little Catholic boy. He got dramatically saved, filled with the Holy Spirit. He served everywhere in the church. And he even ate out of our fridge. You know what I mean? That was the kind of relationship.
He's a big
He played
boy.
rugby with my boys. Yeah, he played rugby with my boys. So I've always had like a father-son relationship with him that cannot be underestimated. And I think that's another C3 feature where we emphasize relationships. I've been involved in some others, and they're treating their church like a corporation, and it's a business. So, but when you're handing it over to a son, you want him to succeed. Don't that's what you want. So that was very much in our thinking. So when it came to, like you, John, how your pastors just wanted to go into a fresh vision, we felt to step aside. So I remember once saying to Andrew, and my wife was with me, Jo, and we said, look, we want to stay in the church if possible. We love our church, we love you, but if this is funky and this is difficult, we're giving you the right, because sometimes sons and fathers don't get on, it's funky. And he's never done this before, but he put his hand up like this, right out in front of me, and he said, Pastor Gordon, thank you very much for that. We won't be talking about that anymore. Thank you for giving me that right. But actually, you're our dad, you're our mum, Pastor Jo. We don't want you to go anywhere, and we need you around. And that's how it happened. And that took me by surprise, his approach. But then I thought to myself, I think he's going to leave this church well, because he just praised us. He just said, we'll have enough of that now. And I thought, praise God, that's good. But no, it did. And then from there, it just took on a very congenial attitude. We never had a crossword. We had some points of not disagreement, but adjusting. No, we think that and we think that, but it was never, ever, you know what I mean, funky. And I think that lent a great deal to moving through with it.
That's amazing. Now, Steve, you actually assumed the leadership of the church in Christchurch after leaving the Auckland C3. Then you became the New Zealand overseer, or the Pacific overseer for C3, and really the movement surged again after Dean Rush had been leading it, and he did an awesome job. And then you actually have passed that on. That's been a transition from you to Tamati and Tess Cameron, overseeing the entire Pacific region. And then you also took on the Howick Church, which you're pastoring now, and which everybody who goes there says if they were going to have to choose a church anywhere in the world to go, they'd go to that one, which is a high compliment from a guy like Sam Pickin, who's got a rockin' church. So
We
tell
paid
us,
him very well.
tell us how you've either been the transition subject or the transition broker. How have you managed to do that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we went down to Christchurch. We started a family. We were intending to stay for about 18 months. We ended up staying for 10 years. And we just got to a place in the life of our family where we had to say, well, look, we either need to move back home, Auckland is home. We either need to move back home now, or we need to stay on here in Christchurch indefinitely, just because it was getting to the stage where it would be unfair for us to move our kids during those teenage years. And we pretty quickly decided that our time in Christchurch was up. And so we were going to move. At one stage, we were entertaining the thought of moving overseas. And actually, our heart was drawn back to Auckland and back to the church that we were in originally as youth pastors. We moved back here we assumed the leadership of the church in January 2020, right about the time that COVID was really starting to get serious, which was quite funny because after leading the church in Christchurch through a period that included earthquakes and terrorism, we were coming back to Auckland and saying, we just can't wait to lead a church in normal circumstances. And then it was immediately COVID. But the leader here was my pastor originally, and he was really just coming to the stage where he was considering retirement. We had quite a lot of advantages. He was just sort of naturally approaching the end. There weren't any negative circumstances around the transition. He wanted to stay on, and he's a great personality to have around the church. He's still on staff with us. He still preaches and ministers. He behaves very well. So that's great. And he's actually one of our best staff members. And I think the reality is that times of transition are very delicate moments in the life of the church. They can go really well, and it can be an opportunity for renewal, or they can go very poorly. I think one of the keys is understanding just the dynamics of transition, and seeing it not as an event, but as a process. For a period of time, when you take on the leadership of the church, for better or worse, and often both, you reap what you didn't sow. And, you are inheriting a team, and you need to give them some time to get used to you, how you work, how you differ from the people that you took over from, what your ministry philosophy is, what your vision is. You also have to be patient because, when you first take over the church, people leave, and it's not personal. It's just that it's a sort of a natural ending. And then a couple of years down the track, people who had every intention of staying, they leave. And it's not necessarily personal. It's not because you've done anything wrong. It's just they had every intention of staying there until they figured out what it was, and they've just decided to move on. But, that's just the process of transition. And people come who wouldn't have come had you not been leading.
Right.
And eventually you end up with a team of people that you appointed. That can just take a period of time, 3 to 5 years, regardless of circumstances. So I think that's really important, seeing it as a process, not an event, and understanding the nature and the dynamics of transition. It kind of helps you keep your sanity through the process.
It's really good.
Yeah,
Can I jump in there, Pastor Phil? Just because I think
go
one of
ahead.
the great thoughts there, and Gordon referred to this earlier, if you do have a son or daughter of the house or spiritual son and daughter taking over, very often they've led a lot of youth and young adults in your church. And so when it comes time for them to be the pastor, they can bypass that period you're talking about, Steve, if you're coming in from outside, because they have a relationship with the current leaders, but the incoming leader. So I just did a transition moment for the Greens Church, Richard and Kathy Green, to their son Will and Liv, and the youth and young adults who have been led for years by Will and Liv. They're like, our guy's becoming the senior pastor. How awesome is this?
Wow.
So there's
Fantastic.
definitely, if you can't always because of crisis, or maybe there's not the leader in the church or whatever. Alex Lee would be the same. Alex and Jessen would be the same in our movement. And so there's this sense of, there's a whole lot of great relational equity with the next generation to leverage off. Andrew and Wendy would be the same, like that. So that is undoubtedly, and I don't know there's ever an ideal transition, but undoubtedly the best case scenario is a spiritual son of the house who knows the church, who loves the church, in a healthy church with momentum taking over.
Yeah.
Now that I don't know,
Well, I
I'm an
think
idealist. Maybe that's 25% of the time or 20% of the time, but it's definitely going to probably produce the best fruit.
Yeah.
I think the order of preference would be that someone from within that local church would assume the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
If not, you would look around the broader C3 movement to look for a candidate, and only if all other choices within C3 are exhausted do you look outside. And the reason for that is because you can assume a lot of cultural fit, and you can leverage a lot of relational capital, which will help give you a real head start in the transition process, rather than someone coming in from the outside and being unfamiliar with the movement, unfamiliar with the culture of the house. Like that's a really good idea.
And John, you were saying, and we mentioned, and you too, Steve, about preferably someone in the house. Some of the worst I've seen are actually with blood relatives. And it's not because there was a funky relationship, but it would be the next thing that I would say is huge. And that is, wherever transitions in my experience have gone wonky, the old adage, assumption is the mother of all stuff-ups. So there's nothing in writing. There's no letter of understanding or whatever. There's no raft of documents. There's no board minutes. They go through the transition. Then about a few months later, what I assumed as the departing leader I was going to have or get to be is completely ignored, but I assumed, and then the incumbent pastor, he assumed, and oh my Lord, and I always say to people, the bluntest pencil is sharper than the keenest mind. You've got to write stuff down and
I
come up
love
with
that.
even if it's
I've
a
heard
blood
that.
relative, or especially.
Yeah.
Well, often
Pencils
that in
never
that
Especially.
forget.
scenario, in the blood relative, there is this sense, we'll just work it out. But
Yeah,
because
that's
there's
right.
going to become a
Yeah,
change of dynamic, and it's a power
yeah,
change of dynamic, then it
yes,
doesn't work. So I think that the principle of that works really well is to go, who is the outside of the church voice, asking
yes,
the awkward questions around expectations and recording them. So I've done this numerous times. Like, where will the office be of the outgoing senior pastor if they're staying around? And they're both like, oh, I think this, and then suddenly you're like, it's like pre-marriage counselling. Let's try and work out all the things that could go wrong.
Totally.
And usually it's around money and
yes,
expectations. It's around control or a voice of leadership or authority and expectations. It's around ministry and preaching opportunities.
yes,
It's around where we sit in the staff or even in church. Like all of these things that could go very weird and funky. To have
yeah,
someone who goes through a list of questions going, let's talk about all this stuff
Exactly.
beforehand, and not just with the male and the male, but the male and the female and the male and the female if they're both
yeah.
involved, so that and get the board engaged. So I think that outside voice is really helpful to make that work.
I
Super
think
important.
over,
Super
I think over the
important.
last few years, we've condensed all of that to about 4 documents. And the first one's the agreement. In other words, what you were saying, you have those discussions and you agree to this and this and this and this or whatever, and times that. The second one's the timeline. You actually then out of that construct a timeline. The third one is the financial agreement. The old saying, follow the money. Oh my. And have it actually in writing. And the fourth one that we found helped us was the departing senior minister's job description. Actually write out, even if it says I'm going in my caravan, or I'm not coming to prayer meeting, or whatever, and actually have it in writing, and everyone agrees on it.
So good.
How do people access those 4 documents?
I'm actually compiling them in a generic form because I've had so many people ask for it.
Right.
So obviously there are specifics and names and amounts and all sorts. But what I've been doing actually over the last few years is very carefully putting them in a template or a generic form so that you can see the kind of things.
Yeah, well,
really
we
good.
look forward to that coming out.
Like
in our movement, I think Lars, Halverson and Lars and Megan, who oversee Australia, have predicted that within the next 5 years, there's around 50 transitions.
The next 5 to 10, crazy.
Yeah, and so this is going to be happening all around the world, and for us to develop a culture of smooth, seamless transitions is super important. My thinking is that discipleship is at the core of successful transitioning, and because that helps with selection, who's a true disciple, not only of Jesus, but actually of our movement, and they got all those values on the inside of them. And if they have a true disciple's heart, they have a culture of honor. And if there's a culture of honor going 2 ways, so the senior pastor who's passing it on, he's not the only one who should be expecting honor. He actually honors the incoming pastor with the highest accolades as well, and shows his support, rather than saying, well, I'm not sure about this guy, but anyway, I'm going. Thank you for, I think that culture of honor and discipleship will ensure that a transition will go smoothly.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think Pastor Phil, because of the age of our movement, maybe transitions have been rarer and often reactive to things not going right. But in the future, they will become more common, and we're seeing that in Australia. And it'll actually just become a natural part of our church's life cycle and a response to things going right. So that means for us to have these conversations around what the dynamics are, what we've learned, what the process is around it. When you start thinking about it, in my mind, as soon as a pastor turns 50-ish, it's not a hard and fast rule, but their thinking should be starting to move towards empowering and releasing authority and giving people opportunity and working through a team as a means of taking a journey towards transition. All of our churches should be working on leadership pipelines, because in a way, this, senior pastor appointment from within the church is the last stop on a well-formed leadership pipeline. So I think it's going to become a more natural part of the conversation for us in the future as we move into, second and third generation of the C3 movement.
Totally. I think money is one of the key elements, as Gordon mentioned before, and it needs to be spelt out clearly. But to agree with your point, Steve, if preparations begin happening around the age of 50 by the individual, by the senior pastor, and by the board, then when that time comes, it's way more well looked after financially, so that you haven't got a pastor hanging on to a position for fear of having nothing. And the second thing would be meaningfulness, like to just stop doing such a purpose-filled life and play golf or
Right.
so.
Right.
If there can be value, like you have, Steve, done for Wayne and Wendy Pete, they're still on staff. Now, that's not going to happen in every circumstance, but I think if money and meaningfulness are taken care of, it provides a way more secure environment for that outgoing pastor. What's been your experience, John?
Yeah, I think that the things that can go wrong if they're not worked through properly, money is at the top of it. And then I think that sense of purpose. So very often, and if we're talking about the outgoing senior pastors, if there's not a clarity of purpose and also just well-developed hobbies and interests. So if suddenly your whole church is just your whole life purely tied up in the church and you don't have anything anymore, there's going to be a massive void. So the ability to develop, so that's around purpose and life. But I think, I think just as Steve said, around at 50, if you as a senior pastor, I actually think that for us as senior pastors, I'm 54. We've had these conversations about the future. It's incumbent. It's on me thinking about the future to go, am I prepared financially to release the church? Because it's not mine. Am I going to be able to, from 65 onwards, can I step aside from leading the church and not financially need that income anymore? So that then we actually make the choice of what's the right time for the church, not what's the right time for me. So if it's 65, if it's 68, if it's 72, whatever it might be, but if that's not because I need the money, I think the worst thing we can do is have pastors hanging on until they're 85 because they just need an income and they didn't prepare to keep themselves in that zone. So I think that's on me. But sometimes pastors aren't great at that. So it is good for the board and again an
Yes.
overseer to have the conversation. All right, what will you own your own house at this point? If not, what changes are you making? What are you doing with your future preparation? Could we take some of your church wage now and set it aside for you, or top it up, or just those kind of conversations with it might be one or two board members who think like financial planners. Just even in some nations being able to see a financial planner and plan how do we get towards that stage, how do we set ourselves up so we don't have I guess a mindset that the church owes us. We're really we're servants of Jesus. It's his church. It's not our corporation. We don't get to sell it. We don't get to hand it off. We've been servants of Jesus, and so at the end of the day, that's I think primarily the senior pastor's responsibility to be well prepared. It's great for the board to help and guide that, and an overseer or a specialist consultant would be really, really good to help with that.
I think having that outside voice of an
Mm.
overseer, which is structured into the C3 movement,
Yes,
and
it
it's
is.
always worrying when there's a barrier by the senior minister to being overseen, because it's only going to help. It's only
Yeah.
going to bring blessing, and we should be secure enough to allow somebody to go talk to the board
Yes.
and know that they're all on our side trying to achieve the best result, the best end for us.
Pastor Phil, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, just as somebody who has transitioned out of local church leadership,
Right.
and being aware of many other circumstances, what is the emotional journey like when I guess at one stage, like, you're at a local church and it's everything is within, it's your call, and then now you relate to this place that that's been so special to you for so many years, but in a very different way.
Great question.
What are the challenges there like?
The emotions are different. They're a cocktail of different emotions. Uh, I miss the people because you love those people and you lay down your life to build something that is going to be a blessing to the community, and in our particular case, to the world. We sent out leaders all over the world to start churches and birth the movement. But I found that as everything was growing, I had not been letting go things. So there was a gradual accumulation of more and more responsibilities. And as our movement grew around the world, that responsibility was increasing. Our church here in Sydney and with conferences and things. And as I was aging as well, I found that a couple of things was slipping through the cracks, and I realized, this is time for me to move on. And I found it a relief, but a sad relief. And because I miss the people and I love my team, they're an amazing group of men and women. And I love just having that momentum every day of waking up and having too much to do. But that was also not good for me because the cortisol was eating away at my serotonin and every other thing. So for me to learn to live a less hectic life was something I had to do. The one thing I missed was having my own pulpit, where I could say the stuff that I needed to say. So I invested into social media, got on a whole bunch of platforms. And so if I got things to say, like even in here with podcasts and online social media, I find that I can actually reach more people with stuff I've got to say. And so it's opened up new doors, new areas for me to express that. I still have a pulpit in so much as I'm the leader of the movement, and that gives me an enormously high level of meaningfulness and demand and a burden. And so all of those things I feel equipped for, but I couldn't say I'm really sad or grieving over moving on from the church. I'm rejoicing because last weekend the thing was packed, and they've got 4 locations and roaring ahead. And Alex and Jess and Lee are doing a magnificent job. So all of that argues for a happy day.
Yeah, but I think, and that's great. I mean, in some ways, you don't really have time to be too mournful. But some pastors, perhaps when they don't necessarily have something meaningful to step into, or they don't have a lot to do with their time, and then they come back onto the church property and they see that a wall that they thought that they commissioned to be painted that color has now been painted another color,
black,
and someone who is very close to them is upset with the direction of the church. There can be some quite complicated emotions for them to navigate too, which is all part of the journey of transition.
I think too that's a great observation. I love your thoughts, Pastor Phil. I know I've talked to you, and one of the things I know you miss a lot is that going to an office with the same crew and the team and the interaction and the vibe of being there. So great if people like Wayne can come back onto team, but that's probably the exception as well, just because the new leader needs clean air to lead. So I think working through, if a leader can hand over and not need money, it's a great thing, because we've known quite a few pastors handed over, thought that the itinerant world would open up for them and that would be an income stream for them. But that's like the top 1%. That's a myth for most of us, that's
totally
not going to be a good income stream. But where we've got some great pastors who have handed over and have found that they're reasonably well set up financially, or sometimes the church will go, hey, out of our missions, we'll pay you a day a week to take the skill set that you've got to the movement. So I think of people like Steve White. I think of people like Bruce in South Australia, Bruce Williams, Keith Edwards, a range of C3 legends who basically have said to Lars for C3 Australia, hey, my sweet spot is this, my specialty is this. I can help churches in these areas. Or if there's a church and the pastor doesn't have a team, they want to have a month off, I'll go there. And Eric Harrison did that for one of our churches in crisis for such a long, he didn't expect a wage. He was self-sustaining financially, but for him, there's a sense, there's purpose, there's meaning, there's relationships, doing the things that he loved doing. And so I think, I mean, that's my goals. I tell people I want to make sausage, I want to cook sausages on the barbecue for all the new Christians when we hand over our church. And I want to just add value wherever I can without being a financial burden. So I think if there's a
Beautiful.
sense of what do people love doing and they're good at doing, and add value in that way, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been trying to do,
Mhm.
I've had a number of denominations ask me to speak on this, and I ask a question, and you can see them going, huh? I say, can I get in the room all the youth pastors and all the kids pastors and all the under 35-year-old pastors to come into the session, one of the sessions? And they say, why? I say, because they need to start
Mhm.
preparing for their retirement now, not when you're 50,
Yep.
55. It's almost too late unless you get a miracle or something. So that's a very
Mhm.
important thing. I think we could help that as a movement, even is to speak to young pastors once they start a Kiwi
Really good.
saver, or what do they call it in America? Annuity, is it?
A
Australia, it's
Kiwi saver. I love that.
yeah,
You say that.
yeah. But start young, and what you've done there is you've
Good.
actually pre-wired your brain that by the time I reach 60, 65, I'm going to have a base of finance. And I think it's about $20 to $25 a week. If you start putting it away at 18, by the time you reach 65, I believe the number's around $1 million. But
Yeah.
we've got to get outside. Jesus will provide. But the old saying, God provides walnuts, but he doesn't crack them open, and it's both us believing God, but also
That's a Palmerston
walnut.
North saying. That's a saying
That's
from Palmerston
Good.
North. Yeah.
I feel like I'm on a podcast with three people born in New Zealand right now. This is quite fascinating.
You are.
That's awesome.
But you'll find the figures are the same, roughly. The figures are the same. And the trouble we've got is baby boomers have had it so good in the sense that, say, the last 15, 20 years economically in the West has been pretty good, but they haven't put away retirement. So that's a problem. I
Right.
don't know the full answer to it,
All
but
right. Yeah. Coming back to the family idea, selection is really important. And qualities of leadership and anointing would be two things that I would really look for. Plus, what fruit have they borne already? It's not going to start coming just because they have a new position.
no.
And are people attracted or repelled? And what kind of people are attracted and what kind of people are repelled? Now, if leaders and good people are attracted to that person, and evil people, gossips, and bitter people are repelled, then that selection process is super important. Now, if a pastor ignores all those for the sake of putting his son or his daughter and son-in-law in the position he's vacating, so you got a guy with no anointing, no leadership skills, and is attracting the wrong crowd or repelling the good crowd. That's a really poor decision. And so and I've seen that. And I'm sitting here looking at Gordon. At that particular time, I know Jeremy, he was not quite ready for that position, but he's now starting a church in Auckland, New Zealand. And parents face very difficult moments in these. And I know around the world, the family inheritance is a foregone conclusion. Like, who there's only one family going to run this church, and that's ours. And I think to have a really unnepotistic environment,
Really good.
so that if the son is anointed, if the son
Right.
is a great leader,
Yeah.
so be it.
Great.
He should definitely occupy, but it shouldn't be taken for granted that he is just the guy, regardless of whether he's got anointing or not.
No, I was just saying again, it's a really great thing to ensure that this whole process is done in a team with the right voices, because we all have blind spots, and I think emotions probably heighten our blind spots. And so some of us have got great discernment, others have in certain situations. So that's why having an external overseer who loves you and loves your church is a really
Right.
good option, so that they can, sometimes the awkward conversation is, look, they're great, but I don't think they're the person. And sometimes it's kind of good to, I think, not be thinking 5 years or 10 years out, there's the one option. You're better to have a suite of options and be raising them up, because some of them might go and plant churches or take over churches. And you don't want, it seems like there's the podcast of some great sayings. So here's another one. We don't want to put all our eggs in the one basket, right? We basically want to, we'd be way better to go, here's 5 options 10 years out. And
That's
that,
right.
maybe one of them doesn't kind of work out, but 3 of them plant churches. One of the good things I think these days is locations. There's a trend towards locations. And so the option to run a location, if you are a multi-site church, not everyone is, but if you are a multi-site church, running a location is a good kind of tracking ground or experience for fruitfulness, to see, can this person lead well in a location setting. So I think that there's a few different options, but yeah, you just don't want to have that prophetic moment and go, yeah, this is them and I'm locked in on them for the next 10 years. Fruit is
Yeah.
the key.
And I think the whole thing of developing leaders is huge. But what I get burdened about often in this scenario is smaller churches. So churches around 200, they're not necessarily at the health and strength and numerical numbers to actually have a number of leaders. The larger the church, that's not always, but mostly, once a church is over, say, 5, 6, 700, there's probably 2 or 3 choices. But I've been involved in a number of churches where under 200, it's pretty difficult to find someone, and usually the senior minister has proficient ministry skills and is maybe pastoring the church well, preaching in the church well, but there hasn't been a leadership development.
Yeah.
And I see that repeating
Amen,
itself.
Gordon.
But maybe that's where outside help from the movement, we can come in.
Yeah.
Like you said before, Steve, help locate potential incumbents from within the movement.
Right. One of the good things is that we've got like 4 training pathways now in C3, which are not just local church oriented. And I love the fact that C3 College online has got the local church right at heart, so that C3 College online becomes the Bible college in a local church. And I think it's in around about 230 of our churches right now, and maybe another 50 churches outside our movement use it, because it's a very high quality, offering. And then we have the Academy, we have Launch, we have Express. I think that's it, right?
They're the key things. And really, you talked about discipleship being the key, which then discipleship becomes leadership development. So the suite of options and church planting comes out of great discipleship. So that's the last few years we worked really hard on really giving some great resources for local church pastors to equip around how do we raise leaders even
Mm.
more effectively. And we've got some outstanding leadership developers in our movement, but definitely the academy, which flows into Express and then launches our church planting training, all undergirded by the Bible training through C3 College, is that's a great resource for pastors.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're talking about, that leadership pipeline. And
Hmm.
John
Right.
saying that they were sort of thrown in the deep end and then learnt to swim. Well, sometimes, that has to be the case because of circumstances or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And you're never truly going to feel ready for something as enormous as leading a church.
Yeah.
However, these sorts of tools, C3
Hmm.
College, Academy,
Hmm.
Express, Launch, they're going to help us prepare people for the task of leading local churches and
Totally.
also just being leaders in local churches as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and as much as we love the best case is those planned, let's go for a retirement that hands over to a spiritual son or daughter within the house. That's obviously the best case scenario. But there's always going to be all the other ones. There's always going to be
Yeah.
someone wants a career change. They're 50 and they want to spend the next 20 years doing something different, or someone else has got a health challenge or a financial challenge or the crisis situations, and so a lot of what we're talking about here just fast tracks that process, and the more we can avoid that the better. But there's still a reality of church life of transitions. One of the cool things that has been a bit of an upward trend is where larger churches with a good heart, they're not after assets, but a good-hearted large church actually can take on some locations because they've
Yeah.
got a range of leaders ready made to go and say, hey, we can look after this church for a season. I know your
Right.
church did that for a number of times. Pastor Phil rescued some
Yeah.
churches, stepped in.
Yeah.
Silverwater would be one, and so that's also can be a reasonable option for some churches who don't either in crisis or just don't have an internal ready-made leader, because ground's been
Right.
fought to get that church out, going. So you kind of want to keep them, honor what's been done there.
Yeah. Totally. It's a it's a culture right through the church, as I said before, of discipleship. So my question to my own staff, and when I'm in another church, when I'm
Mhm.
looking at anybody on staff, is who's plan B?
Mm-hmm.
So talking to the worship leader, saying, well, yeah, you're doing a great job, but it doesn't stop with you. Your primary job is to be discipling your successor, the person who's going to take your job, or three people like that. So if that culture is right through the church, so the worship leader's got three people he's working with, praying with, including them in all of the stuff he does, and or she, and the administrator, the manager, the pastors, all the pastors on staff. Who's plan B? Every connect group leader, who's
Mm-hmm.
plan B?
Mm-hmm.
And so if there is a discipleship culture of that nature, that everybody has identified somebody that they pray with and that they spend time with, it doesn't have to be a heavy duty thing, then that culture spread right through the movement guarantees seamless transitions within the church, from youth leaders to children's
Mm-hmm.
workers,
Mm-hmm.
all of that, all the way. And they don't have to be full-time staff members. It should be the burden of every believer to
Mm-hmm.
have this happening, but especially those who are engaged in active ministry as volunteers, as connect group leaders. So who's plan B? It just
Great.
should be a basic question we've all
It's really
got,
good.
so that we can actually get a culture of transitioning and momentum and forward motion on this whole area of expansion and development.
Really good.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're probably nearing a close, and I've got about 10 minutes. So let's not take all 10 minutes. Let's just take 5. But closing quick thoughts from Steve, Gordon, John.
I just think there's so much to this, and I think the most important thing is that you engage outsiders. And this is too big a moment in the church's life, and it's too
Mm-hmm.
big a decision to be done on your own. So I
Mm-hmm.
think engaging the board, engaging key leaders, doing it
Right.
early, bringing in your
Hmm.
overseer, having that outside perspective, and just engaging in the conversation early and doing it well, I think is going to be really helpful.
Yeah.
Really good.
Gordon.
Then I think moving on from that, once that is the framework, create a raft of documents, starting minuting every meeting and coming
Mm.
up with all the agreements and then condensing it down to a workable plan. And once you get
Hmm.
that plan, I would say stick to it, and just
Yeah.
work
Great.
the way. Because what you were saying before, Pastor Phil, about emotion, I find the practical transition can happen a lot easier than your emotion. And
Right.
usually the emotions come after it's
Mm.
all
Right.
done, or once. And I've had pastors look at me and just say, "What have I done? I've stuffed up. I've got no. What am I going to do?" Well,
Mm.
in
Mm.
reality, that's almost too late. Even though that's sad,
Hmm.
although you can always do something with what you've got. But what you're saying,
Mm.
Steve, to have a process so that you elongate working through your emotions. So long before we went public about handing
Mm.
the church over, I had spent maybe 5 years minimum thinking about it, discussing it with my wife, praying about it, processing that, so that when it came through the process, I'm not knee jerking, I'm finding these left of
Hmm.
field reactions. But I would say a
Right.
good plan in writing really helps mitigate that and reduce your
That's great.
emotions.
Yeah.
Really good.
John?
Really good. Yeah, look, there's a couple of really practical ones, I think, for the outgoing senior pastor. Seeing an external counselor about starting to see someone a year before and over the time and through to
Yeah.
afterwards to
That
process
helps.
those emotions so they're not leaking out into the church. So I just think an external, that's just someone who you can really talk and,
Yeah,
go through a range of things. I think that's been really helpful for a lot of people. I think recognizing that while there's different phases of transition, so that there is the behind the scenes phase of conversations that Steve and Gordon have been talking about and things being written down, but recognizing that when you go public, the moment you announce that there's a transition happening, the church goes into limbo. The church goes into pause mode. The leader is no longer the leader. Everyone starts to look to the incumbent leader. So one mistake that people can do is have too long an actual public transition, because
right.
there's this whole who's the leader, where are we going, who's casting vision, who makes a decision on that. So I think in a local church setting, probably 12 months is about the ideal if there's a planned phase, so that the church is getting their head around that. It's an awkward phase of transition. It's awkward for
The overlap.
everybody. Yeah, the
Mm.
overlap, that baton change moment, because the outgoing is like, I can't make a decision about that vision thing that affects the church financially for the next 10 years, but the incumbent's not ready to make that because they're not the leader. So just minimizing that time as would be the second thing, so that public announcement. And then the third, just speaking to the ones who are the successors, who are having the privilege of taking on the role of a church. I think one of the things that is really important for the foundation of your leadership moving forward is honor. And so to really honor well the leaders who have, sometimes they've planted the church, it's their baby, it's their blood, sweat, and tears. And so to really honor them for what they've done, to engage the church in honoring them. There's all sorts of different creative ways. That's financial, that's with words, testimonies, and stories, that's with celebration events. And keeping the honor moments, and sometimes there's a month or so. If it's a long-term pastor, a month of honor is awesome, but keeping that separate from the beginning and the commissioning of the new senior pastor. You don't want to just have one event where we're thanking the old and celebrating the new. And so really putting the energy into to honoring well. I think I know we felt like that's one thing we would be doing that would set our, like that scripture, honor your father and mother, and it will be go well for you. I think that's a great principle for incumbents to honor well. Don't underestimate how much the church will want to honor and allow them
Mm,
that opportunity, so that
mm,
everyone goes through a grieving process in transition. So
yeah.
that's a really important part of it.
Well, the people are in that church only because they love the pastor.
Hmm.
They wouldn't be
Hmm.
there if they didn't love him. And if you,
Hmm.
the incoming pastor, show dishonor to him, you're going to lose
Yeah,
those people.
yeah,
So you're
that's the worst
smart
thing.
to just love that pastor and look after him. Amen. Well, it's
Mhm.
been a great session with you guys. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And I know this will be a very vital podcast for a lot of pastors and boards to listen to. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll look forward to talking with you again soon.